Imagine this. Two world-famous names. One daytime studio built for friendly conversation. What was pitched as a reflective talk about service, trauma, and duty slowly tilts into something much more volatile. By the last segment, one guest seat will be vacant, and in this scenario, Prince Harry will leave the view before the broadcast is over. The turning point doesn't look explosive at first. It almost passes as ordinary. That morning, the set of The View glowed in its usual warm palette. Soft lights, cozy colors, the visual language of safety and civility. The audience cheered as Prince Harry walked out, his face composed, almost carefully neutral. He wore a dark navy suit with an open collar, no tie, a calculated mix of relaxed and refined, approachable, contemporary, intentionally distant from the image of a traditional royal. He nodded at the crowd, offered Whoopi Goldberg a polite smile, and sat down at the table. Moments later, Angelina Jolie entered from the opposite side. The applause changed, not necessarily louder, but slower, heavier, tinged with reverence and curiosity. She was dressed in simple black, unfussy and understated. Her posture was straight, her face calm. She didn't sweep the audience with her eyes or beam at the cameras. She acknowledged the hosts with a slight nod, took her seat, rested her hands loosely in her lap, and waited. On television, it looked like any other star-studded episode. In the room, the air already felt denser. Whoopi opened the show in her familiar, welcoming tone. "We're very glad to have two guests with us today who've both devoted huge parts of their lives to something bigger than themselves," she said. Harry dipped his head, appreciative. Angelina offered a tiny nod, still silent. The first 10 minutes moved along without friction. Harry talked about mental health campaigns, redefining what it means to be a man in public, and walking away from structures he felt no longer matched his values. His answers were steady, practiced. He'd traveled this narrative road many times. Angelina listened, not zoned out, not hostile, but with the focused attention of someone evaluating, weighing. When the questions came her way, she spoke quietly about visits to refugee settlements, families uprooted by war, and children who had no concrete memory of home. Her language was plain, unembellished. She didn't cast herself as a savior. She framed everything as work in progress. The crowd leaned in. Joy Behar smiled, sensing an interesting contrast. "It's really something," she said, "seeing how service can look so different from person to person." Harry seized on that. "Exactly," he said lightly. "But I think the key thing is using whatever reach you've got. If the world gives you a megaphone and you whisper into it, what's the point?" Angelina didn't jump in. She shifted slightly in her chair, eyes still on the hosts, not on Harry. Then she said, in an even, quiet voice, "Some of the most important work never ends up anywhere near a megaphone." It wasn't framed as a jab, it wasn't even framed as a disagreement, but something subtle changed. Harry smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well," he answered, "some of us never had the option of working in the shadows." Whoopi looked between them, felt the edge, and let it drift by, for the moment. The discussion stayed careful. Harry opened up about scrutiny, about being watched since childhood, about feeling performance imposed on him. He described leaving that world as brave, necessary, protective. Angelina listened again. Then she spoke, this time as a question to the whole table, not directly to Harry. "Do you think," she asked softly, "that stepping into the spotlight by choice feels the same as being pushed into it from birth?" Harry turned his head toward her, eyebrows lifting just a hair. "I don't think I ever had a say in being in the spotlight," he answered. "That was decided for me." Angelina met his gaze. "And still," she said, "you decide what you do with it now." The crowd murmured. Harry leaned back, ankle over knee. "A lot of people don't understand what it's like to have every move dissected, every action turned into a performance review." Angelina nodded once. I do understand it, she replied. I just learned that not every reply needs an audience. The quiet that followed wasn't clumsy, it was loaded. Joy tried to lighten the weight. Clearly, you've had very different journeys, she said with a small laugh. Different, sure, Harry cut in, still smiling. But there's also a habit of dressing up some kinds of pain as noble just because it looks good from far away. Angelina's face didn't twitch. She didn't defend, she didn't explain. She simply said, pain doesn't need a bow on it. It needs people to take responsibility for what comes next. That was the first hairline fracture, hardly visible, but permanent. The cameras rolled, the audience held their seats, and no one, not even Harry, fully realized the rules of the conversation had just been rewritten. After the show returned from its first batch of commercials, the energy on set was different. Not chaotic, not loud, just keenly alert. Harry now sat closer to the table, elbows near the edge, no longer leaning back. The casual ease from the top of the hour had drained away. Angelina remained physically unchanged, poised, still, as if the tension belonged to everyone else. Whoopi cleared her throat, choosing her words with care. Okay, let's keep this going, she said. We're talking about using a platform, about responsibility, about accountability, Harry slipped in, smoothly but clearly. Angelina turned her head, finally giving him her full attention. That's an interesting word, she said calmly. Who do you think it's for? The audience buzzed instantly, a low wave of sound. Harry smiled, but there was an edge behind it now. Anyone who profits from a system while taking swings at it. There are people who spend years inside powerful structures, then act later as though they were always separate from them. Angelina didn't bristle. She let the words hang. Then she answered, I don't claim to float above anything. I just leave when I don't need to be visible to do the work. That line landed with far more force than applause ever could. Joy leaned in. Harry, she asked carefully, do you feel like people who choose a quieter kind of service misread you? Harry exhaled with a half laugh. Silence doesn't automatically equal depth, he said, and keeping your head down doesn't automatically make you wise. Angelina fully turned to him now. Neither does constant exposure, she replied, or telling the same story over and over. There it was, over and over. Harry's jaw clenched just a bit. I go back to my story because people ignore it, because big systems bury things until someone forces them into the light. Angelina answered quickly, but without heat. Or because some things stay exactly the same, no matter how many times you repeat them. The crowd fell quiet again. Whoopi shifted in her seat. Let's bring this back to service, she suggested. Angelina, with your work. Harry slipped in again. Service without owning your part in the damage is just charity on a stage. This time, Angelina didn't wait. From my side of the table, she said softly, service that never steps away from cameras starts to look like a performance. A collective gasp rolled through the room. Harry straightened, eyes narrowing. So now you're saying I'm insincere, he asked. I'm not judging intent, I'm looking at results. Angelina replied, gaze steady. Joy whispered, oh wow, barely loud enough for the microphones. Harry blew air out through his nose. It's easy to talk about results, he said, when you weren't born into an institution that controlled your voice before you knew who you were. Angelina tipped her head slightly. And still, she said, you decide what you do with it now. In that instant, the audience understood. This wasn't really about charity or trauma or royalty. It had become a clash over who gets to define what suffering counts. Harry leaned back, arms crossing tightly across his chest. I left everything, he said. Titles, status, protection, all of it. Angelina's tone never rose. And then you turned that into a narrative you could sell. More than once. The room stopped moving. Whoopi opened her mouth to step in, then closed it again. Harry let out a short, bitter laugh. So that's your read. That's all you see. I see what you put out, Angelina answered, and I pay attention to what you return to. The air felt thin. Joy tried to cut the tension with a joke. "Well, this is getting real," she said weakly. Harry didn't look at her. "You act like you're above all of this," he said to Angelina. "Above being questioned, above being judged." Angelina shook her head once. "No," she replied. "I just mistake being watched for having a purpose." That line sliced clean. Harry leaned in again, his voice tightening. "You know what wears you down?" he asked. "Being told what you went through is just content, that what you've done with it is just marketing." Angelina didn't flinch. "You know what wears me down," she said quietly. "Seeing hurt turned into a permanent label." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not in boos, but in stunned sound, shock, awe, discomfort. Whoopi raised a hand. "Okay," she said firmly, "everybody take a second." But Harry pushed forward. "You don't get to dictate how I recover," he said. "And you don't get to control how people interpret you," Angelina replied. That was the line nobody could unhear. As they cut to another commercial, Harry stared straight ahead, jaw locked, breaths slow and shallow. Angelina laced her fingers together again, her face giving nothing away. In the control room, producers were already murmuring, because when they came back from the break, this was no longer just a conversation, it was something else entirely. When the show returned again, the clapping was scattered. Some audience members applauded on reflex, others just stared. Harry now sat bolt upright, shoulders tense, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. The relaxed guest who had first walked on stage was gone. In his place was someone primed for impact. Angelina looked almost exactly as she had at the start, centered, composed, as if the storm had taken shape somewhere behind her. Whoopi forced a small, practiced smile. "Welcome back," she said. "Let's take a step back and reset." Harry let out a tiny, audible breath that sounded very close to a scoff. Angelina didn't respond. Joy leaned in, her tone careful. "Harry," she said, "a lot of viewers see themselves in parts of your story, but some also wonder, do you ever worry that revisiting it so often keeps you living inside it?" Harry turned to her quickly. "No," he said. "What traps people is being forced to keep everything inside." Angelina finally spoke. "Sometimes," she said evenly, "that's also how you leave it in the past." Harry laughed once, disbelieving. "Easy to say when people believe you the first time without demanding justification," he replied. Angelina met his eyes. "People tend to listen," she said, "when you stop insisting that they must." Gasps shot through the crowd. Harry leaned forward, voice rising for the first time. "So now I'm insisting?" "No," Angelina answered. "You're clinging." Whoopi lifted both hands. Okay, we're going to slow this down." But Harry was already locked in. "You don't understand," he said, not taking his eyes off Angelina. "You were admired, celebrated, protected. I was picked apart." Angelina nodded slowly. "And still," she said, "I chose not to turn that dissection into my shield." That struck harder than almost anything she'd said. Harry's face flushed. "So you're saying I hide behind my pain?" he said. "I'm saying," Angelina replied carefully, "that deep hurt can either become armor or luggage you drag everywhere." The studio went dead quiet. Joy whispered, "Oh my," not realizing her mic caught it. Harry pushed himself halfway out of his chair, then sat back down, a quick, unplanned movement that gave away just how rattled he was. "You think I wanted any of this?" he snapped. "You think I enjoy reliving every part of it?" Angelina's voice softened, but only a little. "I think you've built so much around it that you're not sure who you'd be without it." The reaction from the crowd was instant and intense. Some people clapped, others groaned, a few just stared in shock. Whoopi's face hardened. "Angelina," she said gently, a warning embedded in her tone. Angelina didn't look away. Harry stood up completely now, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You don't get to analyze me on daytime TV." His voice wasn't booming, but it was shaking. "You don't get to sit there like some moral statue and pretend that makes you superior." Angelina rose too, not with a slam, but with calm finality, like someone who has already made a decision. "I'm not superior," she said. "I'm just not in the same place anymore." Harry stared at her, breathing hard. "You really think you're better than me?" Angelina shook her head once. "No," she answered. "I think you're stuck where you were, even while you keep walking." The word stuck hit like a punch. Whoopi stood as well now, hands out. "All right, we're going to de-escalate this." But Harry was already locked in. "I came here to speak openly," he said, "not to be dismissed by someone who's mastered looking unaffected." Angelina didn't raise her voice. "I didn't dismiss you," she replied. "I paid attention. Then I disagreed." Harry gave a bitter laugh, looking down the table. "This show," he said, "acts like it wants honesty until honesty stops being comfortable." "We want respect," Whoopi shot back, "and we're losing that right now." Harry turned to Angelina one last time. "Congratulations," he said, sarcasm cutting through every syllable. "You win, as usual, quietly, from a safe distance." Angelina answered with the calmest word she'd used all day. "There's no victory here," she said, "just space." Harry stopped, then nodded once. "Yeah," he said, "I'm done." He lifted his microphone, unclipped it, and let it drop onto the tabletop with a heavy thud. The sound rang out across the studio. As Harry headed for the backstage exit, the audience reacted, not with cheers or boos, but with a wild, confused uproar. Angelina remained standing. She didn't track his exit with her eyes. She didn't speak again. And as Prince Harry disappeared behind the set, the lingering question wasn't why he left, it was how he didn't see where this was going. The backdrop closed behind him quietly. That small, almost gentle detail vanished in the clips that would soon circulate. There was no slammed door, no shouted last line, just a man walking away from a dialogue he no longer had a grip on. The set remained frozen. Angelina stayed exactly where she was, hands loose at her sides. She didn't turn to look after him. She seemed to know instinctively that watching him leave would only extend the moment. Whoopi exhaled slowly, her demeanor setting like stone. "All right," she said, voice level but unshakably firm. "We're going to pause." The audience didn't react out loud. No applause, no jeering, just a kind of held breath. Joy leaned back in her chair, whispering something too soft for the microphones. Sarah Haynes stared down at the table, fingers intertwined tightly, as if anchoring herself to the furniture. Angelina sat. Her chair barely made a sound. Whoopi turned toward her, searching for balanced language. "Angelina," she said, "thank you for staying." Angelina inclined her head. "Talking matters, even when it's hard to hear." Whoopi looked straight into the lens now, not just as a host, but as the person responsible for the room. "When we invite guests here," she said, "we invite them to share openly. But there's also an expectation, respect for each other, for this table, and for everyone watching at home." The weight of that statement pressed down immediately. Angelina didn't add anything. Her silence carried its own message. Behind the cameras, the show's staff were already moving at speed, checking time, cutting clips, preparing for the inevitable wave of online reaction. Words like walk-off, clash, and confrontation were already starting to appear on phones and tablets. On set, though, things were much quieter. Whoopi gave Angelina a small nod. "We're going to step away for a moment," she said. The feed cut. When the show resumed again, Prince Harry's seat was still empty. Angelina sat at the table beside it, the absent vacant space next to her impossible to ignore. The absence felt intentional, almost like part of the lesson. Joy finally broke the silence. "Well," she said softly, "that was a lot." Angelina didn't laugh. "Disagreement doesn't scare me. Pretending everything is fine does." Whoopi studied her. "And leaving," she asked, "what does that mean to you?" Walking away can be strength, or it can be giving up. The difference is whether you've actually said what needed to be said before you leave. The crowd took that in quietly. Later that day, headlines and hot takes would explode. Some would rally behind Harry, calling the exchange unfair, too personal, overly confrontational. Others would praise Angelina for staying composed, for her directness, for refusing to inflame the situation. But one image would repeat over and over again more than any particular quote. That unoccupied seat, less a symbol of being pushed out, more a symbol of a choice made. As the segment wrapped, Angelina stood, thanked the panel, thanked the audience. She didn't bring Harry up again. She didn't need to. As the lights dimmed and the show moved on to the next topic, one realization hung in the air. Not every win happens by remaining at the table, and not every retreat is weakness. Sometimes the most powerful moment on live television is when someone realizes a little too late that the room was never actually under their control. And often, the most telling part isn't the exit itself, it's the quiet that settles after. Some discussions end in cheering, others in press releases and think pieces, and some end with an unfilled seat and a silence that communicates more than any final argument could. If you're drawn to slow-building, high-stakes exchanges like this, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next story where one conversation changes everything.